Hello, lovely people. Today we're going to be discussing, am I dumb? Are you dumb? Are we both dumb? Is anyone dumb? Hi, I'm Jessica, and if you're new here, then welcome to the channel. Please subscribe for amusing educational topics. By clicking the join button next to the subscribe button, you can also become a member of the Kellgren-Fozard Club, where you'll receive behind-the-scenes access to extra videos and entry to an extra section of my Discord board, which is the thing I now have, which you can find by clicking the link in my description. Also, while you're down there, make sure to suss out the merch shelf, which only shows up if you have your ad blocker off, FYI. There's currently a sale going on in my shop, as we're going to be changing things up very soon, and since not all of the items will be migrating over, this is a good chance to buy anything you might like now, as it might not be available later. You can also find various merch pieces in the shop tab of my YouTube channel, which will be visible on desktop and devices. Remember to use ShopClear for 15% off. On with today's video. A few weeks ago, I was recording for Rick Edwards' podcast, Who Says You Can't? And when we reached the end, everyone in the room smiled, so thank you, that went really well. And one of the technicians asked whether there were any lines we wanted to record again, or anything we wanted to cut. I was happily about to say no, when my sign language interpreter leant over and voiced, "You said dumb." Whoops. I'd called myself dumb for forgetting something, I think. But in the age of the internet, with increasing awareness of diversity and inclusion, we know that we need to address racist, sexist, homophobic and classist language. Ableist language, it just all too often creeps through. Maybe you don't realise, but words like spaz, lame, crazy and retard are considered problematic in some circles due to their difficult history. I say some circles, I mean they're just problematic, to be honest. The term dumb is included in this, and in this video I'm going to explain why, because it's a complex thing and you probably weren't aware. Were you aware that the word dumb is more offensive than just calling someone unintelligent? Click the card at the top of your screen to answer the question and see whether your answer is different by the end of the video. It was important to me to re-record the line for the podcast because as someone who went deaf in my teens, yes, deaf, like actually deaf, the kind of deaf who can't hear anything without hearing aids. Deaf. I know that I'm not as culturally aware of words and phrases that aren't acceptable in deaf society as I likely would be had I grown up deaf. 1 in 6 people has some form of hearing loss, which really isn't that odd when you think about it. How many people do you know who struggle to hear or understand everything that's going on? There's obviously a spectrum when it comes to hearing loss, and it often affects people as they get older, but it's important to remember that deafness is not just a loss of sound perception, it can also be socially isolating and interfere with your ability to interact with the world. There's also a thriving group of deaf people who consider themselves to be deaf with a big D. That is part of deaf society. Picture it. You're a deaf person who knows sign language in a room full of other deaf people who know sign language. You're not really going to feel socially isolated by your lack of hearing, and nor is it going to affect your ability to interact with the world in that room. Historically, however, deaf people, whether they be deaf with a big D or deaf with a small d, haven't been given the agency to make their own choices, including choosing how they would like to be referred to. Overwhelmingly, deaf and hard of hearing people prefer to be called, wait for it, deaf and hard of hearing. Gasp, I know, plot twist, no one expected it. Yet antiquated phrases such as deaf and dumb and deaf mute are still in use and can be found even in mainstream media, let alone casual conversation. But why are they offensive? Well, as we all know, the meanings of words change all the time. Gay used to mean merry and light-hearted, and now means gay. But some people also use it to mean bad. Don't do that. But, fun fact, meat used to refer to any type of food. Silly used to mean blessed. And dumb was a word for someone who couldn't talk, not necessarily someone deaf, but now it's used negatively to insult someone's intelligence or to suggest a decline in standards, such as dumbing down. Many derogatory words for people with disabilities like moron or idiot began as medical definitions used to categorize people with disability as lesser humans. At a time of widespread eugenics, these terms, used in medical textbooks and scientific journals, were used to give justification for institutionalism and forced sterilization. As you can imagine, these terms being used clinically doesn't mean they're okay to use in everyday conversation, especially when the clinical usage was so terrible. The term deaf and dumb is an ancient and offensive term. The Greek philosopher Aristotle labelled deaf people as such because he felt that deaf people were incapable of being taught, of learning and of reasoned thinking. In his mind, if a person could not use their voice in the same way as hearing people, then there was no way that person could develop cognitive abilities. We know this now to be untrue. I say now, I'm pretty sure deaf people at the time were using their cognitive abilities to think about what an arse he was. It was only once dumb had been attached to deaf people that it then came to mean silent. And the definition has continued because this is how many see deaf people. That's clearly offensive because it implies not only that deaf people can't take part in a conversation, but also that they have nothing of value to add anyway. Deaf people are not silent, however, and if you think they are, well, it's not that they don't use your language, it's just that you don't know theirs. Sign language is a completely valid form of communication, and it's a language in itself. Using your voice is not the only way to communicate. We then come to the second meaning of the word dumb, and the one I'm really struggling to shake from my vocabulary. Stupid. Boy, do I wish I could stop saying that. There are plenty of people who believe that someone's inability to use their voice well means there's nothing going on in their brain. From people who stutter, to those with a heavy foreign accent, to even extreme classism, or my exhausted brain fog moments where everything slows down. We've all come across those people who think that a difficulty in outputting means there's nothing going on inside. And anyway, some deaf people have really excellent speech. Hello, yes, that's me. FYI, being able to speak does not make you any less deaf. That's not how ears work. Just because I can communicate to you does not mean I can communicate with you. I'm very guilty of letting people put the burden for communication on me. I bend over backwards to lip read, ask for subtitles or assistive technology that can translate, but I don't then hold people accountable for how little they're doing in return to make it easier for me to understand them. And that's on me. You speak so well, I forget you have hearing problems isn't a compliment, and it doesn't mean that you get to treat me like I don't. Just saying. We can relate a belief that difficulty outputting means there's nothing to be shared back to dyslexia and similar conditions. After all, just because you can't write it down doesn't mean you can't produce beautiful poetry. It's an ill-informed and false conclusion. Everyone has the ability to contribute to society. The alternative term, deaf-mute, isn't seen as much better either. It's an offensive term from the 18th century meaning to be silent and without a voice. Again, it implies that deaf people have nothing to bestow. It's a technically inaccurate label anyway, since deaf and hard of hearing people generally have functioning vocal cords. Yes, for many people who are born deaf or lost their hearing at a young age, there may be a difficulty in modulating their voice, but in no way does that imply they have nothing to say. Communication is merely being understood by others who can then respond, and that is by no means an impossibility for deaf people. If you're kind enough to be watching this video, to have clicked on the link, to be interested in expanding your knowledge, you probably already knew that deaf and dumb and deaf-mute weren't the most PC of phrases. But did you know the same applies to hearing impaired? You know, you might have even thought that was the PC term. Society is confusing sometimes. Hearing impaired was once considered the go-to term because using the word deaf was seen as rude or too bold. It's a well-meaning term, but it's innately negative. It focuses too much on what can't be done. It establishes the standard as hearing, and anything different as substandard or damaged, not good enough. I don't know anyone who wants to wear the label not good enough. You might argue that the terms deaf or disabled are innately negative themselves, but to my mind, that's merely an issue of perception. I'll put a video in the card above that explains more, but to me the word disabled really isn't awful, it's just a part of me. A bit of who I am. It's neutral. I can choose to be proud of it just as I can choose to be annoyed by it, but isn't someone else coming into my life and telling me that I'm genetically impaired, which, it's harsh but true. Still don't say it though. I can say it because it's me, but you can't. Unless you're genetically impaired too, in which case we can high five through the screen. I'm going to work really hard from here on to completely eradicate the word dumb as a pejorative from my vocabulary. Our culture systematically devalues people who have disabilities. We're disproportionately subject to discrimination, violence, and underrepresentation. And those are big, significant problems. So what difference do a few little words make? Well, the common language of ableism, labels, and slurs contribute to the cultural acceptability of dehumanization of disabled people. So please, now you've been told, raise awareness that the term deaf and dumb is no longer acceptable, and that calling someone dumb, even if it's yourself, as I did in the podcast, it is not. No one is devoid of interesting thoughts or things to say, not you, not anyone else. Dumb implies we don't need to listen to that person or that idea that isn't worth the time, but no one deserves to be ignored. You have an opinion, you have a voice, you are unique, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Show your respect for people by refusing to use outdated or offensive terms. And when in doubt, just ask the individual in question how they identify. And remember, however you identify, you are very welcome on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.